You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show, as always. So, yeah, man, this has been kind of an interesting time for Star Wars news, it seems like, because there's actually a couple of things. We even know what we're going to be talking about Friday, but in order to find that out, you're going to have to ride this out till the end. So,
right.
Yeah. It was really tough, honestly, to figure out what to talk about tonight because there's just so many things. But we finally settled on this little nugget. It looks like there are strong rumors that Ahsoka is going to be dueling Vader, probably in the upcoming Ahsoka series. Now, of course, we know that series pretty much focuses on Ahsoka and Sabine looking for Ezra. Mm-hmm. And we'll have to see, how much Thrawn plays into this and all that, because, of course, that was teased in The Mandalorian during her first scene, actually. But, I don't know. Obviously, Vader's been dead by this time, so it obviously has to hit in flashback. And a lot of the reason why these rumors are coming to pass is because the same actor that actually played Vader during the action scenes. Because remember, in the Obi Wan series, Hayden Christensen was in the suit, but for the action scenes and all the stunt work in the Vader suit, it was this other guy. Forgot his name. But
Tom Connolly? That's his name?
Well, I mean, now that you're bringing it up, let me.
Sorry.
Yes, you're close. You're close.
Tom
you're in
O'Connelly
that.
Or
Tom O'Connell.
O'Connell. Okay.
Yeah.
Tom O'Connell.
Yeah. All right. I mean, I have to say, I'm mildly impressed over here. I'm just putting it out there.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, of course, man. I mean, look, we compliment people when they do something
Get your
good.
roses while you can.
Hey, listen, at any time that you and I actually remember a name, especially of some of these minor people, because, we're blanking out on, I mean, hey, we're not
people we should know.
Right. Now, we're not quite at Taika Waititi level where we're forgetting that, Natalie Portman was in the entire prequel trilogy, but I mean, we're not that far off. So, I mean, this is good, but again, Tom O'Connell, yes, he was the one that actually portrayed Vader in the suit during the Obi Wan series, and apparently he's going to be the only one playing Vader in Ahsoka, which, I mean, you gotta figure that's gotta mean some sort of action scene, duel, something like that. And of course, we also know, and naturally, I'll give you your whole time to weigh on this too. I just want to get some of this stuff out of the way. And of course, for you, the audience, you guys have to weigh on this because this is actually potentially big news. Because one of the things that we had always wanted to see, in the speculation type of a thing, was we had always gone like, man, I mean, sure, we got the episode 4 Obi-Wan versus Vader thing, but man, wouldn't it be cool to see like a younger Obi-Wan, like the Ewan McGregor version, duel Vader? And then we got to see that. Well, the other thing is, when we're all watching Star Wars Rebels, and we're seeing that Vader versus Ahsoka duel, we're kind of like, man, don't get me wrong, very cool, lots of emotional content, but I would love to see this in a live action context. And that's, I don't know, it seems like maybe where that's going, as you pointed out earlier in the show, you're the one that submitted this article. You're the one that said, hey, check this out. Maybe this is a possible topic. So go ahead, weigh in on this whole thing.
Yeah. First of all, this is big news. And I do believe what they're actually speculating is that we're actually going to get the live action version of that duel that we saw in Rebels. And which is great because one, it's good fan service for us, like those who are the hardcore fans, number one. Two, it also for those who may not be as up to date on Ahsoka, I think we're going to get in the series, number one, a lot of thoughts of or remembrance of Anakin, and people might get the clue in, like, okay, she was his Padawan, and why she left the Jedi Order, and then just a lot of her background into this. And then
Mhm.
so when you see this flashback now of, like, okay, Vader and Ahsoka, it may come to, for a lot of people who may not be as abreast on that, it gives things in context. So I think that's really, really good. And of course, it's like, once again, who doesn't want to see more Vader, right?
Well,
So,
and you do have, I have to say, you do have a point here, because one of the things that's easy to overlook is, like you said, there's not a lot of people. Well, I shouldn't put it like that. There are a significant amount of casual fans that don't watch the animated shows. They're not necessarily dialed in on every little thing. And I mean, even some of the people that did watch it, they might not remember that,
mhm.
yeah, we had an Ahsoka versus Vader duel. Now, of course, I would say it was kind of a big deal. But at the same time, yeah, there's a lot of casual fans, and even some stronger ones, and maybe they just don't take in every single little piece of content. They might not even know this duel exists. So that is a really good point that you're making on that one.
Yeah, I mean, just even today, by the way, we missed you at work today.
I know it's
Paula,
so weird, man. It's now you're at the shop more than I am.
but Paula, she came in and she actually engaged myself and Doug in a little sci-fi conversation between Star Trek and Star Wars.
Oh,
That's our
she's
Star
like
Trek
a
reference, but
hardcore, man. She's like,
had no idea. Yeah,
oh
but see, the
yeah,
thing is,
dude.
though,
She's big into
but
it.
I
I think,
found
did
out.
she finish Obi Wan yet?
Yeah, so that's what we were talking about today.
Okay.
However, I brought up the Clone Wars animated series. She's never seen any of it, and
What?
so
I didn't even know that.
exactly,
What the?
that's what I'm saying. So
That's
I know
insane.
we have words for her when we get back to work. But
My
anyway,
head's exploding.
so she's never seen any of it. So that's what I'm saying. So that's also says to me that she probably hasn't seen Rebels either.
Yeah, well,
So
and this is using her as an example.
that's the point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and definitely, and this is the thing, right? Because she actually is a fan of Star Wars.
Oh yeah.
And I think the problem with a lot of people when it comes to the animated shows in particular is that they really don't realize how much canon content, like really deep,
Hmm.
important to the whole franchise. So, you're watching something like Obi Wan. Okay, you're thinking, hey, I've seen the prequels, right? The original trilogy. Maybe you've seen
Hmm.
the Disney, like Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett. You think that you're pretty much caught up on and everything, but man, when you look
Hmm.
at how much is actually in the Clone Wars in particular, because that thing went for like 7 seasons, but even Rebels, it's like, dude, there's so much that's in there that's really deeply important to canon.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, there's a lot of continuation of the story and there's a lot of further character development. Because she was actually talking about how we got on that topic was we were talking about Hayden Christensen, reprising his role as Anakin. But the thing is, I was like, well, did you see the Clone Wars? And she said, she thought I was talking about the movie. I'm like, no, I'm talking about the animated series.
Mm.
And she's like, oh no. And I'm like, yeah, see, you see the whole descent and it actually overlaps into three. And so that's what we're talking about with this whole Ahsoka battle, because in Rebels, that was a big thing. Like I remember even the music, I can steer. I can still hear the music of that scene in my head because it had a very ominous, but like a almost like a heartstring tone to it.
Hmm.
Like someone was pulling on your heartstrings, and it was just like, okay, even Vader's, whole line, we don't have to be enemies. He was once again, he still has that compassion for her and he didn't want to, but it's like, well, this is what you want to do, then fine. You know, so I
I'm
think
still
that's going
I'm still just blown away that she hasn't seen the Clone Wars. I mean, that's like an important thing. By the way, as one other
um
just little side note, I really like that whole monitor thing that they have where they have all the upcoming jobs now on the. Did you see that?
oh, oh yeah. I
Yeah,
was there.
that's cool. Like I said, I stopped in there later today to to get something, even though I was off, which I should actually say this publicly because my mom, she hasn't been watching lately, but she does watch the show. She is a subscriber. Thank you, Mom. Today was her 80th birthday. So happy 80th birthday to my mom. Yeah,
happy
happy
birthday.
So I took the day off because she was supposed to come over. Of course, they didn't come over. I had to go over to them, but I took the day off because it's like, you know what? It's a milestone birthday. I should probably try to spend, some time with them and all that stuff. So that's why I wasn't there. And of course, Voyager comes through and says, happy birthday, Eric's mom. Yeah, I mean, she's engaged with you guys. I mean, particularly, I think Ronaldo was mostly the only one. But my mom and Ronaldo, it was like I
know you might have a new brother now.
yeah, exactly. So I mean, I felt that it was worth mentioning, and I mean, promise I'm not gonna talk about work too much on this thing because you guys would have like no idea what we're talking about. But understand that there are some people from the job though that do subscribe. We got Chad, we got Nick, we got Doug, we got some people are actually viewers and subscribers of the show who we work with. So that's a really cool thing, and I think it's worth pointing that out. But yeah, you're right. I mean, when it comes down to it, particularly with like I said, with the animated shows, I cannot stress enough. And you know what? I'm even going to go a step further. I'm going to even say that just the more that I read these comics, there's so much coming out. Not necessarily now between episodes 3 and 4, which is mostly, I think, what we're talking about here. But because Ahsoka, because The Mandalorian, because the Book of Boba Fett do take place after Return of the Jedi, these comics are really setting up a lot of the groundwork. I mean, and again, you guys, I'm just saying, you guys could take it for what it's worth. I'm not saying that you have to absorb every single piece of content that's out there. I mean, I don't even do that. Although I will say, another little side note here, I'm not trying to take too many detours from this topic or anything, but the Shadows of the Sith book is so good. And that's another big canon thing. So you're having some of the books, not every book, but there's a few key books that I would say, if you're either a canon junkie, and by that I mean you're somebody who, you're a Star Wars fan, you don't want to read and watch everything, but you do want to watch some of the key canon type content. So in other words, things that really seriously affect or reveal certain canonical aspects, right, of the whole Star Wars thing, you want to take in. I can tell you right now, Shadows of the Sith is a big one. The Darth Vader series, this whole War of the Bounty Hunters / Crimson Reign thing is huge. So you're really doing yourself a disservice if you don't check it out. As far as the High Republic goes, I think it could get to that point, particularly when the Acolyte comes into play, but I don't know. We'll have to see. But definitely, like what you and I are talking about right now, the Clone Wars and Rebels, I mean, you have to watch those.
Yeah, and speaking to that, one of the main things that they're speculating is that in Ahsoka series, we're actually going to deal with the whole world between worlds, because we're dealing with Ezra, we're dealing with, and that was a huge.
Wait a minute, did Ezra
plot point?
Did he? See, I'm trying to remember now. Admittedly, it's been, here I give this whole grandiose speech, right, about these things. But I have to admit, full disclosure, there are certain aspects of Rebels in particular that I may have, forgotten. So, that said, did Ezra, I remember he went off with Thrawn, but did they go to the world between worlds, though?
Yeah, that's what we actually we were exposed to. It was in Rebels, because that's when
that I remember, but
he went into the whole little parallel universe, and that's when Palpatine was using Sith alchemy to kind of like stop Ezra from doing some stuff. And people often said that, there's speculation that that's how Palpatine survived, is that he went to the world between worlds, when Vader threw him down the shaft,
See,
or
now
gave him the shaft, if you will.
here's the thing about that. Now, I don't know where you land on this, but for me, I mean, I guess that's a plausible thing, right? Like, I would accept that. That became an official canonical explanation. I would say, well, all right, it's a little weak, but okay. I would prefer what has been hinted toward in not just The Rise of Skywalker, where he came back, but in some of the other materials where it was more like his Sith spirit or essence or whatever you want to call it, basically just transfers out, right? And looks for a new host. To me, that just makes a lot more sense and is a little less cheap than just going, he went to the world between worlds.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we will have to see how that pans out. But
and that's, I don't know, man. Sometimes...
Well, that's the thing with this. Well, that's the thing with Ahsoka, though. I mean, and that's why I feel like her show is really going to be very, very pivotal.
It's looking that way.
In the progression of Star Wars. No, because you're bringing in... So, because they already teased Thrawn in Mandalorian, because she was asking, like, where's Admiral Thrawn? Where's your boss? Or, where's Thrawn? Okay, so we know Ezra has left with Thrawn, as we last saw him in Rebels. All right. So now you're bringing this character in to the present, who's a Jedi, or at least in the progression of such. So now we have that. We have Ahsoka. And this is all taking place, like I said, during post Return of the Jedi era. But we also still have Luke Skywalker running around. So this is really going to... It's just really going to be interesting to see how all this stuff is really going to truly play out, because you have a bunch of different era people in the same sandbox now, where we've never heard of it before. Well, because this is a gap of time that we've never seen.
Yeah.
Or even really heard about. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I think the Ahsoka series, along with Mandalorian, can be one of those things that really transports Star Wars to a different level, and people might forget about... I know you often talked about rebooting the sequel trilogy, but I think this could actually be the thing that's like, okay, we don't necessarily... I mean, the sequel trilogy takes place later anyway, but we can go into this for a while, because we don't know where these adventures will take these people. And so I think that's a cool aspect about this whole thing as well.
Well, a couple of things, though. So just to start with the last point you made, because it's a big one. And it's not so much that I'm saying that, rebooting the sequel. What I'm saying is that, and this is what I've always said about it, they're going to, instead of this big ploy that everybody wants, where, you get these petitions every once in a while, oh, we should reboot the sequel trilogy, right? Because, it had its issues. Let's leave it at that. The thing is, what I've been trying to tell people who are like super hypercritical about the sequel trilogy is, don't worry about it. It's going to be irrelevant in like 10 years, because they don't have to reboot the sequel trilogy, simply because if they keep telling these stories and filling in all this stuff, if enough time passes, it's almost like it'll just be rebooted by proxy, because you're going to start butting up against the time of the sequel trilogy. And if you have enough story, like alternative story... Well, we lost Daryl. Well, I'll make this point anyway. If we have enough alternative story to essentially, where it's just like you keep adding to the stuff. Let's just say, like right before, well, let me back up for a second here. So you have Return of the Jedi, and then obviously you're having a lot of this comic book stuff that's predominantly taking place between Empire Strikes Back and maybe at the very beginnings post Return of the Jedi, right? Now, if you keep going with this and you keep adding more story and you start shifting things in a direction where you would rather go, because let's just say you look at the sequel trilogy and you're just like, you know what, we could have done better. Well, you don't have to do this whole big grandiose, we're going to reboot the trilogy or whatever. You could keep telling these stories to the point that you could then go into an alternate 7, 8, and 9, and it would make sense with like the 10 years of stories that you have, where if you did that, people wouldn't even notice it, right? They would just look at the sequel trilogy almost as an alternate piece of content. And it's cheap, but you could do it. You could simply dismiss it as, well, that was one possible thing in the world between worlds, but here's the real, what really happened. And you could almost do that with all three things, right? You could do the whole like the Timothy Zahn thing is one, the actual Disney sequel trilogy is another, and then you can just reboot through television or movies or whatever. You could do it.
See, I don't know. I mean, that whole world, like, okay, this was like a possible thing. I don't know about that one. I would say that you could, if you introduce enough content in this time, in this space, where if you have Ezra, Ahsoka, and things like that, I agree that you could almost like go around the sequel.
That's
trilogy,
another thing
in a
that you
sense.
could do. Yes, where
And
you
and
don't.
I think that would be the better
Sure.
option. It's like kind of go like the sequel trilogy happened, but okay, on this side of the galaxy, this is what's going on, and we're choosing to pick it up from here instead
Right,
of
and you
from
just
Rey and
you
Finn
just
and-
kind of ignore,
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's going on over here, but here's what we're really focusing on. And so, in a sense, you're softly rebooting it by just giving you another perspective of it.
Right, and you might
And
even
that's
make
true.
mention to it, like, oh, you know, Rey did her thing with Starkiller and Starkiller Base and Kylo.
Well,
and
here's
everything
another
like
thing you
that.
could do. Let's just say you wanted to even include the original character, because this is something that I've never brought up on the show before, but I've always thought that you could do. Let's say that because everybody just hates the sequel trilogy. I mean, I'm making a blanket statement because, you know, not everybody hates it, but most people are disappointed by it. Let's just say it like that. And the biggest problem is you have, you know, Han, Luke, and Leia, right? I mean, everybody was disappointed that they didn't have one last adventure, and they didn't, and that's why everybody likes the Timothy Zahn version, because that's a little bit more in line with what everybody expected. Not to mention the fact that that's what's been around for like 20 or 30 years. What you could do, and I never even thought about this until this conversation you and I are having now, they could coexist. Who's to say that the events of Heir to the Empire couldn't have happened too, and then it just so happens that the Force Awakens, Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker were weaved in between them. Like, for instance, we know that with Heir to the Empire, the idea was that Thrawn kind of rose to prominence, and Han, Luke, and Leia were, you know, in their positions. Now, sure, with the Force Awakens and everything, Luke went off to Ahch-To, and he got disillusioned by the Jedi and everything after the whole Academy and everything. Those stories could actually coexist in the same timeline. Because you could say that maybe Heir to the Empire happened, and maybe you could say, like, and I'm just using that as an example because that's already written. But you could certainly do this with a new storyline too. You could say, like, Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and Last Command happened, and then, but it happened before Force Awakens. Because actually, Heir to the Empire takes place, I think, if not immediately after Return of the Jedi, around the same time period as Ahsoka, Mandalorian, and Book of Boba Fett. So you could actually squeeze those stories into the earlier post-Return of the Jedi period and still keep episode 7, 8, 9 intact.
Are you talking about using them as films, though, or are you just talking about the stories just as they live?
Well, I mean, I guess either or, but I wouldn't mind seeing them
Because my
as
thing
films.
is, I mean, I would love to see him as films, but then how would you do? Because you would have to recast everybody,
Well, yes and
which goes
no.
back to our
You
last
could, well, yes, exactly. Like the last, but well, here's the thing though. But think about it like this: you could maybe there's one of three ways they can handle this. They could do the recasting thing where you get like Alden Ehrenreich, Sebastian Stan, like people that were kind of established or popular or whatever, right? You could recast it that way. You could de-age the actors, which again would be extensive. And it might be wise to maybe wait 5. I mean, you don't want to wait forever because you do want Harrison Ford and all those guys around. But, I mean, as we did talk about, and if you missed it, we did do a show, it was last Monday, I believe, where we talked about de-aging versus recasting and which was better and all that stuff. And one of the things that we pointed out, we're at the point right now. Because it was proven in the Book of Boba Fett. Mark Hamill never set foot anywhere near that stage. They basically had another actor playing Luke. They put Mark Hamill's young face, and then they used AI for the voice. You could do that with all the actors. Now, granted, at this point in time, in 2022, might be a little expensive and extensive. 2025, maybe not so much. So that is another route you could go. The third one, and this is the one that I kind of go back and forth because with the whole de-aging and all that, you could either go film or you could go Disney Plus series, right? Or Disney Plus movies. Remember when we did the show that Heir to the Empire could be the first Disney Plus film? You could do that. The other option,
make it an animated series.
That was the other option that I was about to bring up. Thank you for stealing my thunder. I was just about to say it. And you blurted out like some sort of Star Wars Tourette syndrome. But yes, you could do it as an animated thing. And that might not be the worst way to go because as we were talking about at the beginning of the show, I mean, the animated stuff holds a lot of deep canonical things, right? The Clone Wars, Rebels, even the Bad Batch.
Well, even you have the master, with Filoni. He's the master of animation anyway. Yeah. So it's kind of like if you wanted to do it, I mean, he'd be the guy to probably make that happen. You can bring Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill in. Harrison Ford sounds like himself. I mean, sounds like an older.
You would,
but you can do the AI thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You could do the AI thing with him.
As long as he gives permission.
And then you got to do the AI with Carrie Fisher's voice.
Sure.
And there you go.
I mean, that's the beautiful thing. You could literally do that. You can go in a lot of directions. And for a franchise like Star Wars, it probably is not a bad idea. I mean, I don't know. I don't want people in the comment section of the chat, suddenly going, well, hey, in the de-aging versus recasting show, you guys said whatever. It's like, well, all right. I'll give you my little 2 minutes on that one. Whatever I said last Monday is what I thought last Monday. I mean, I'm not trying to cheese out. This is not my World Between Worlds little explanation.
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
I'm just saying, look, I mean, I will be the first person to tell you that there are some things in this franchise that I basically do feel pretty much perpetually, right? Like, it's kind of a constant thing. If it does change, it's a very gradual, we're talking like decades-long thing. I wish I could think of an example, actually. I don't know. Can you think of anything that maybe you thought about this franchise, like, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, and maybe you changed your mind on it?
Maybe. Like, change my mind in what way? Like, it's not good anymore, or?
Well, yeah, like, I mean, kind of a concept thing, or maybe it was a way they handled the character. I don't know, anything. I mean,
I would say Fast and the Furious. Like, we talked about that. Like, that's a franchise where they kind of deviated from the original.
Well, I mean, in Star Wars.
Oh.
So, in other words, kind of like, say last Monday I said that I was, I mean, I don't know, because, I just do these shows and, blow through. I don't know. Half the time I'm cut. And we've had people too.
You're like, I'm high half the time. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Right, exactly. No, but here's the thing that's funny about that, though. And this has seriously happened. And it's only happened. So this is why I need you to co-host this thing, because I usually get called out when I do these things on my own. Well, here's the problem, right? Like, what'll happen is I'll do the show on my own. And usually what happens is either you're having a technical issue or something comes up, right? And you can't do the show. And I'm like, okay. And I'll usually have like 10 minutes notice, right? That it's like, oh, crap, I got to do this by myself. And that's when I get into trouble. Because every single time that I have been called out on something, it's been when I've done this show solo. And it's like, it'll be like 2 weeks later and I'll say something and people be like, well, wait a minute now. Well, 2 weeks ago you said this. And I'm thinking, crap, did I actually say that? So I don't know. I mean, it could be any, like, for instance, let's just say, for instance, because again, I don't actually remember everything that I said for that de-aging versus recasting thing. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that I said they should never recast Leia. And then maybe I start thinking about it or whatever, or just, some time goes by and you start going, you know what? I mean, if you don't recast her or you don't de-age her, then you're basically limiting where the franchise can go. So that would be an example. So can you think of anything? It could even be something like the prequels. Maybe your attitude toward the prequels has changed. I don't know, anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, like, I remember once thinking that, well, I mean, the prequels is a good example. The prequels are it because I remember thinking like, okay, I remember at one point I did think the prequels were awesome, but that's just because at that time I really didn't.
That's so wrong.
I really didn't. Well,
it's almost like some sort of weird Star Wars support group. Like, yes, I'm sorry. I thought they were awesome at the time.
I had the bumper sticker that said prequel supporter.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. It's kind of like you're going back, like you're some politician apologizing for some horrible thing. It's like, yeah, I thought the prequels were awesome. I don't know what I was thinking. I'm sorry. I was out of control. Look, it was during a period where I was drinking. I don't know.
Well, so you have to understand. So for me, the prequels, at the time in which I saw the prequels, my age, so like I said, I saw Phantom Menace came out 99. So I was 14 at the time.
I mean,
so
and that
so
makes
as
sense.
as a 14-year-old kid, like, okay, yeah, I'm fascinated by all the new technology, the Jedi are flipping all over the place. Like, I'm paying attention more so to the moment of Star Wars and not really so much the story. I mean, I got the story, but I wasn't paying attention to the dialogue like that. I wasn't paying attention to like, oh, he sounds wooden, or why would I'm not thinking about that. I'm just looking like, oh, look how cool this is, and I got it. We have new Star Wars. I was so caught up in the moment. But then once I started to understand, once I started to understand like story as I started to get older and started to looking at movies differently, no pun intended, through a different lens, like I started really like, okay, yeah, the prequels kind of sucked. I mean, as far as execution, the story was fine. It was just the execution of a lot of things were not so
well,
much.
Voyager says the prequels are awesome. Thank you very much. It's kind of
hey,
like,
man, fly
right,
the
man.
flag, man. Somebody has to do it.
Hey,
Voyager,
look, and hey, honestly, the prequels are enjoying like almost a renaissance now, because people are starting to look back, and I think that this goes into what you're talking about.
The sequels were so bad.
Well, yeah, you're probably not wrong about that. Honestly,
that's partially true. Though,
that is partially it. Partially, people are probably just going, maybe let's take another look at the prequels. Maybe they didn't suck as bad as we thought. But here's the thing too, and this goes into it as well, is that I think as you go on, right, like as time progresses, you start, and you and I have talked about this numerous. I mean, I can't even say, you know, on this show, go back and check it out on YouTube. Look, I'm going to say go back and check out all our shows on YouTube. In fact, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. You can get personalized things. Not like you have to be notified on every little time that we were on. You can actually sort of pick and choose. I don't know how that works because I just subscribe and get reminded of everything. But you can do that. So definitely hit those. But I think what's happening is that people over time are actually looking back at the prequels and they're now seeing the story. And this is something, like I said, we brought up on numerous shows. I can't just point to one. Is that, like you said, yes, the acting was a little wooden because Lucas doesn't know how to direct actors. He's not an actor's director. And
on top of that, they didn't have anything to act with. I mean, everything.
Well, that makes it even worse. You're kind of alone in this green room, and he's like, "All right, well, just there's a bunch of clone troopers coming at you. Just react." Well, what do you want me to do? I don't know. Just do whatever comes naturally. It's like, George, nothing's coming naturally. I'm in the middle of a green room. Okay, there's a green room. I'm not reacting to anything. I mean, if they're lucky, they have Ahmed Best with the little Jar Jar head on. That maybe you might have that, or you might be in the scene with another actor or something. But by and large, yeah, you got nothing. So we know that. But I think what's happening is, in the context of everything else that we're getting in Star Wars, you're starting to see, hey, these stories were actually good. And sure, the acting's a little wooden, and people are a little stiff, and maybe the execution wasn't the best. But if you actually just look at the prequel trilogy for the stories, for some of the action, for the overall vibe that you get, it wasn't so bad. And they're also, and here's the thing, because when you look at it through the lens, using your term here, of having the sequels and having all these books and having the TV shows, especially because, and we've talked about this a bunch of times too, you've had all this content that's taken place between episodes 3 and 4. You've had, there's the Clone Wars, which takes place between 2 and 3. The Clone Wars series, I think, helps a lot. Rebels helps a lot. Rogue One. All this stuff, I think, Bad Batch. So what's happening is you have all this additional story content that is actually putting the prequel stories in somewhat of a different context and light than what we had when we first received them, if that makes sense. So basically what's happening is people are looking back on the prequels more fondly now because they have more information and it's telling us a little bit more of the backstory, and it's making sense. But again, you almost have to be, to coin a new phrase here, like a canon detective. And by that, I mean you are seeking out things that are directly affecting the Star Wars canon. Like, they're not just cool stories that are taking place between whatever and whatever. It's sort of like, oh no, this is moving the canon forward. Or, oh no, this is filling in some big, mystery or something. And you have to check that stuff out. Now, granted, I'm not saying that you have to do it or nothing will make sense, but it does enrich.
Yeah, I mean, and just kind of bringing this all back to Ahsoka, though, it's like...
Yeah, that wouldn't be a bad idea, huh? Given the topic of our show is Ahsoka versus Darth Vader. But look, this all ties in. I mean, it's not like we're getting off topic.
I mean, it all ties in, and that's why I was wanting to kind of like always kind of come back to the center of it all, and that's with Ahsoka, that character being in two different timelines, right? You got the prequel era, and then she's in the post-original era. And so
Voyager says that's a giant cup. He's referring to my water glass.
Oh, your water.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Hey, look, man. We do a lot of talking, and sometimes these shows are like 3 hours long. I gotta be hydrated. Plus, the room that I'm in right now is like ridiculous. Yeah. I mean,
It was like 90 to here or something.
absolutely. It's like I got all the windows shut, because I'm trying to get the air conditioning up here. It's not working. I have to turn down the fans because otherwise it'll bleed through the mics. So yeah, I'm not exactly at my best here. I need hydration. But
he's
on
please. Mustafar right now.
Yes, I'm on Mustafar right now.
But yeah, with Ahsoka being in both timelines, I think that lends just so many different possibilities because there's references to a bunch of different things, and there's things coming into that space, in the post original trilogy. So, like I said before, when you have Ezra, Thrawn, these are the people that we saw in the, I guess if you want to call it the prequel era, but then
That's a good point, though. I mean, would you? Because all this time I've never actually thought about it, but it really isn't. I mean, you have the prequel era, which would be anywhere within 1 to 3. You had the original trilogy era, which would be 4 through 6. But in between 3 and 4, it's. I mean, I guess
I still consider that the prequel era.
I would call it the post prequel era.
Okay.
You're like, whatever, man.
On
the other.
It's the prequel.
It's like, listen, I didn't ask you. I'm making the point here. You make the point. You can call it whatever you want. But I mean, are you saying that because it's prequel characters, or I mean, what's your? I'm just.
I know you're trying to just.
I just need some clarification. Look, I'm thinking of our audience. All right.
Yeah, no, I get it. And the only reason why I will say it is because it's kind of like everything it's still leading up to the original trilogy. So I kind of look at it as all one big thing because the story never really stopped.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. Well, kinda. I mean,
because it's like, okay, look at it this way. It's like, all right, you had Empire. I mean, not Empire. You had the Revenge of the Sith. All right, okay, so that ends, and then you get Rebels, which is still like a continuation of all that. Then you still get the Bad Batch that leads up to that's still before the original trilogy.
See, the Bad Batch, I can hang with that. The only problem with including Rebels in on that is now you're getting a little close to the original trilogy. It's almost like, are you doing a sequel to the prequels, or is it a prequel to the OT?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, and the reason why is because the original trilogy, it's its own separate story in a way, because that's when you start bringing in all completely new characters on this complete journey. Right, so you have like Han, Luke, and Leia, like, and that's a whole thing. So I'm just looking at it as like, all right,
it's a continuation of the former. Yeah,
even characters. I mean, and even though Rogue One is like 20 minutes before A New Hope starts. I mean, it's kind of like I wouldn't consider that. I would kind of almost consider that part of the original trilogy now.
It was, because I mean it basically, look, I mean it's leading up to a main storyline of Episode 4. I mean I guess if you wanted to split hairs, you could say it's a prequel to Episode 4, and really, you could almost say that whole thing could just be one giant episode, right? I mean, because the problem with that is, and this is the only problem with him doing this whole numbering system, right? I mean, what would you call that, 3.5? Let's see what Voyager has to say here. So he's basically saying, I hit the right button. I don't think they'll recreate the Ahsoka Vader fight in Rebels because they already did the broken helmet. To be honest, I have no idea how they will incorporate Vader into the show. So Voyager is basically trying to bring us back on topic here. Even though, like I said, but yeah, I mean, you were never really suggesting that, right? I don't actually think we even were talking about that. I mean, we did reference that earlier by saying, yes, they did have this battle. Now, Here's the
I know
interesting
that.
thing,
No,
though.
they're actually talking about doing the live action version of that.
So that's what it actually is. It's not just a live action battle. Well, that would make sense, right? Like she's flashing
Yeah,
back on that battle, but it would be done in live action.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, I
And it
guess that
makes
would make
sense
sense,
though.
right? Because, yeah, when else would she have faced him? That was the first time. The only way you could do that again is if she faced him a second time, but that wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense. I mean,
Right.
granted,
And
they
the
can
only
Obi-Wan the thing maybe, but
well, here's because it's a key element to that though, that we've all been wanting to know. How did she survive?
oh yeah. So you're thinking maybe
That's
they
that's
flash back to
that
that then.
and I think that's where we're going to get this. We're going to get that answer in the Ahsoka series because remember, like I said, for those who have seen it, um,
Spoiler
they
alert.
duel. Yeah, they duel inside the Sith temple or what have you, and then Ahsoka basically force pushes Ezra out of the temple so it can just be her and Vader alone because she didn't want any interference.
hmm
And okay, we see Vader walking out, battered and bruised pretty much. But then, we see this white owl looking thing fly out and it focused on it a little bit too much.
A little bit.
And so then now it's like, okay, well, if they were stuck in this temple, how if Vader killed her, then how is she in post Return of the Jedi? So we have to see how does she make it out of there
Yeah.
with Vader still in there.
Absolutely. But and here's the other thing too. Let me just say this one little thing before I comment on what you just brought up because there's some discussion here. But first of all, just to Voyager's comment about the whole they already did the broken helmet thing. I mean, look, Star Wars is all about repeating certain motifs, right? I mean, look at how many hands they've chopped off in this saga. You could almost say, well, they already did the chopping off the hand thing. They've been lobbing off hands like everybody. I mean, Rey's actually lucky. She's never, ever had her hand lopped off, and that's only because she's not really a Skywalker, right?
Yeah.
If you're a Skywalker, your hand's coming off. That's just the way it is.
Leia barely made it.
Right. So, I mean, the idea that, they wouldn't necessarily use I mean, first of all, we all know the broken helmet thing, again, probably was influenced by that fight when they wanted to use it for Obi Wan.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, if it really is a flashback, then they have to put it in there because that's what happened in the animation. But to actually think that, they wouldn't necessarily use it again. Like I said, how many hands have they lopped off? How many, there's a lot of repeating themes to that. But to get more specifically to what you're talking about.
4 so far, by the way.
Is that how many it was?
Yeah,
hey, man,
yep.
limbs. Look, I mean, when 2-1B
Mace.
basically. Oh, right. Oh, and he had them both
Mace.
lopped off. So does that count as two?
Mace had it. Well, I just kind of count him as one, but like
All right.
Mace, Dooku, Anakin,
Yep.
and
You got Luke.
Luke. Yep.
Didn't somebody get their hand lopped off in the sequel trilogy? I guess not. Although I will say this, the fact that Finn survived that whole lightsaber up the that slight, yeah,
man.
Well, with the latest Star Wars thing now is everybody except Qui-Gon gets to survive being stabbed by a lightsaber. Like suddenly that's no big deal anymore. It's like the lightsaber version of a paper cut. So that if I were Qui-Gon, that's the first thing that I would have said. When I popped up as a Force ghost, like, really, dude? Like, was there something I missed in the training about, maybe how to survive this? Because, literally everybody is surviving being stabbed with a lightsaber at this point. But I digress. Getting back to what you were saying, though. Yeah, if they were to do that whole thing where she's flashing back on that battle, that would make sense. And like you said, that whole owl thing was really bizarre to me. And they never really explained that either, did they?
Mm-mm.
And it just, I mean, was that supposed to be Ahsoka? Was that like her spirit animal or something? I mean, see, there was a couple of things.
I think it's a force power because if I'm not mistaken,
What, like
she
sending her
kind of
spirit to animals or something?
or just being able to um
Communicate, yes. I mean, we know
yeah, but
Ezra.
also transform yourself into, because I mean, like, just take those little sparkly foxes, that kept running around, like
Oh,
they were
yes.
force sensitive, they had the force or whatever, or they were force sensitive or however you want to call it.
But see,
And I think, and there's so much different things that we haven't, that we're discovering about the force. I mean, who knew you could force project yourself across the galaxy like Luke did? No one knew that you could do
well,
that. There's a lot of,
kind of.
Yoda's coming back. He's touching you in the flesh, or he's hitting you with this walking stick. He's calling lightning down. I mean, he's doing a lot of stuff.
So some of this stuff, and again, I mean, this is one of the problems that I have, right? So some of the stuff I get, right? Because it seems like it's
Mhm.
extensions of things that have been introduced. But there's, particularly in Rebels, Rebels introduced some things that I think we're getting a little bit beyond maybe the Star Wars realm. I mean, I get it that it's mainly fantasy. I mean, as you know, nobody's been hammering that point more than I have, that Star Wars is more fantasy than sci-fi. It's actually
Mhm.
sci-fi fantasy, right? So I mean, there's a handful of things that fit that description. But I mean, they have to be careful somewhat, because one of the things that Lucas always liked was to keep things a little bit grounded. That's why he had a messy universe. That's why there are certain things that, besides it being timeless and hitting basic beats and things like that, and the whole poetry of it,
Mhm.
Lucas liked to really, one of the things that separated Star Wars from everything else was he liked to keep it very grounded, not too fantastic. And I think that, you start getting, okay, now I can transform myself into an owl, or, I mean, these are the kinds of things that now I think you're starting to enter into a territory that's a little bit beyond what would fit in Star Wars. I'm not saying I couldn't hang with it. I'm just saying, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I really don't think, and this is the cool thing about, um, and you had once brought this up
Oh,
with another
crap.
franchise.
Are
I
you
know.
about
Now
to,
I'm
like,
doing this to
nail
you
me on
now.
something?
Well, not
Is this like one of
completely.
those things that we talk about that I brought it up in another show and I'm about to be nailed to my own cross here? I mean,
No.
all right.
Well, this is like our
I
own private
got to check these
conversation.
things because I need a mounted defense in my head. I'm just saying. Let me
Well,
drink out of my
it's kind of
big
like,
cup. Didn't sound right, did it?
yeah, I'm just,
I
let's
wear a
move on.
big cup too, by the way.
Okay,
All
so
right, moving on. Moving on to your
yep.
point.
So, Jesus. Anyway, so um, you had brought up the fact that, like, what made Michael Myers creepy was the fact that, like, there was no explanation for why he did what he did. It was just like he was just like evil personified, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of one of the I think that's one of the cool things about the Force, and you kind of brought it up, like with the whole midichlorian thing. Is like, if you try to define it too much, like um
Oh,
it kind of
yeah.
loses its power if you try to define it too much.
Right.
And then to the point that Palpatine made, he said, the dark side of the Force leads, to abilities some to consider to be unnatural. Even when Yoda went on that whole journey to try to find, like the answers, and he ended up, fighting himself. And I think that was that. No, that was Clone Wars. That was Clone Wars when he did that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so the Force is one of those mysterious things, and that's the thing. Like, even someone as wise and as powerful as Yoda, who's been living for like 900 years, right? He still didn't know everything about it, and he was still, even people come to him. He was like, mysterious as the Force, clouded some things are.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes, like, you don't know the full extension of it, and that's the beautiful part about it. Even when and it stands to reason, because even in Clone Wars, when you had the father, the son, and the daughter, they were shape shifting and turning it into all types of stuff.
Well, but that's like I mean, I can handle that because that's like a very contained. And plus, these guys were like I mean, they were the Force in a sense.
Right.
Which, of course, is another thing that's a little strange. And I'm not 100%, again, I'm hanging with it, but I'm not. See, Star Wars is a very peculiar little beast. And this is why I think so many people are having issues with it. Where you get these otherwise brilliant, great directors who everything just falls apart, right? Because Star Wars, on one hand, you want to grow it, you want to expand it, you want to nurture it, but at the same time, you do need to stay within these very defined boundaries. And you got to know when to push and when to pull. Now, a lot of people in the same breath are saying, oh, they're not adhering to Lucas's vision. A, Lucas gave us midi-chlorians. B, Lucas was about to, if he had been able to make 7, 8, and 9, he's going to give us these weird, like, Force nanobots or something.
Yeah, but that's my point, though. It's like, so you got to understand, too, like, if it serves the story. So what I'm saying is, the content that we have known Star Wars to be, okay, Star Wars was created in 1977, and it came and ended. The original trilogy ended in the early 80s.
Yeah, 83.
83. That's right. So at that time, you can only do so much. And for what the story he was trying to tell, the Force did enough for what it was trying to do. For what it was trying to do. All right, now we go to the prequel trilogy. All right. Well, now we're seeing the Force used sometimes in a bunch of different ways. I mean, heck, we didn't know like you could Force run and do all that. We didn't know that you could, I mean, they're always elevating it.
But
And
can I
so
just point out that Force running, that's an extension of some other things where turning yourself into an owl is a little bit, I mean, you can't really compare those two things.
what I'm comparing it to, though, is the fact that for the story it needed to tell,
Do you really
you
need to
could
tell
do
about a story like somebody turning into an owl? Is that a
yes,
necessary
because
story
because
component?
okay, like, did we need to see Ezra like talking to space
No,
whales? I mean,
exactly. No,
but no, but I think that's that's a cool thing though. That's a thing that is like, okay, the Force,
okay.
everybody can use the Force differently, and that's the whole
something the
point.
High Republic brings up. But here's the thing: if you look at the High Republic, and if you read more and more content, that's done, and that's because you have storytellers who actually understand storytelling. They understand how to operate within the context. And part of this is, and this is something you've brought up a million times, because you could say this about the old expanded universe. Why don't people just listen to these authors more? They understand Star Wars better than anybody. A lot of them were actually, some of the people that are writing the new canon, they were writing expanded universe stories. These guys have been writing Star Wars longer than anybody. And the High Republic is a perfect example of, here's how you expand everything, you tell what you need for a story, but you do it in a very organic way that makes sense. And what you just brought up is something that the High Republic is actually stressing, because this is the zenith of the Jedi and everything. Everybody kind of has their own Force deal. Like it goes even beyond, like, say, some of the dark side powers versus the light side stuff, right? I mean, you got people that are using the Force in really unique ways. Var Chris being one example, right? Where she kind of hears everything in song. But it's not a real outside use of the Force. It's really more the way it's perceived. So yeah, I mean, I'm all for that. It's just there's some things, and this is something you've brought up in the past too. It's like, okay, well, if you're going to break something out, you got to explain it within the context of whatever story you're telling.
Well, I think but I think we do have those contexts already. That's why I mentioned the whole Palpatine reference. You got these Jedi texts that's out there. We don't know what they all say. I mean, and you made mention of like these authors, which I don't disagree with. Yes, they have been writing great content, and they've been probably been writing it for a long time. But you got the freaking protege of George Lucas sitting here writing all this animation stuff, which is all this stuff is taking place. So it's the same.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that if you're gonna tell me that Ahsoka can turn into an owl through the Force, you gotta put that into some rebel storyline that
Well,
explains that.
that was my biggest complaint when I saw it. But
I
not
do remember
unbeknownst to
that
me,
actually. I remember you
yeah, that
saying
was
that.
my biggest thing. I was like, okay, like that was cool. But like, okay, where the heck did that come from?
Well,
But I think
again, I
that's
mean,
where
and
we're
that's
getting.
and I think that that's my only problem. I'm not denying that the Force could do. Hey, Chad is actually watching us.
Ah.
Speak of the devil. One of the coworkers we just mentioned
Hi,
earlier.
Chad.
Hi, Chad. Wow.
I gotta give his morning greeting.
I know. Yeah, exactly. Well, it's what he's doing, right?
Yep.
But that's the thing,
Um,
man. If you can, I don't have a problem with saying the Force, you could turn into an owl. Okay. You just have to tell me how that's being done. You have to give me some sort of an example because you're right. You can't just simply limit I mean, if you're going to grow something, you can't just limit the thing, right? You have to somehow allow it to grow, but you also can't grow it unnaturally either.
well, I think that's why we have to have this scene in Ahsoka. Like I think that's why they're bringing it up. I think it's no mistake that this is coming to pass, and that's why we're getting all this. And I suspect that we're going to get even more information as this goes on, as far as Ahsoka is concerned, because I think we're going to hear different things that will actually support some of the things that we've seen. She may even bring up the world between worlds because she was kind of involved with that as well. And that's another thing, like that hadn't been done in Star Wars either. This whole parallel universe type thing, and you got Sith alchemy. I mean, you got all types of stuff. You
That
got
was,
people
well,
transferring spirits, and I
kind
mean, like
of.
that's what I'm saying.
Kind
Like
of. I mean, the Sith
it's
alchemy
all.
thing, that's been done for years in books. You got to remember that a lot of these concepts have actually been taken from the expanded universe stuff.
But that's what I'm saying. Like the force is such a vast thing. You got to think about it. Like, okay, if it's in all living things and it penetrates us, binds us, holds the universe together. Like, okay, if it can do all of that, like, where's the limit? There is none.
Well, and granted, I'm not, and I don't mean to, because it almost sounds like I'm making a sci-fi complaint, right? Because this is one of the things that sci-fi fans will do. They'll be like, well, like the owl thing, the space owl. Well, how could Ahsoka turn herself? That doesn't make any sense. You have to explain that to me. Okay,
Hmm.
I get that. It's sci-fi fantasy. You don't necessarily have to explain everything. And you just brought up if the all-living force, which is essentially an allegory for God, right? If it
Hmm.
if it binds everything together, if it's doing all this stuff, if whatever, well, what can't it do at that point? So I
Hmm.
understand that, and I'm not. Again, it's not so much the problem that I'm having here. It's not so much that I'm fighting the fact, oh, the Force shouldn't be able to do that, or Han Solo. That's not how the Force works, right? All I'm
Right.
saying is, I just have to have. You can't just do the whole like Mary Sue kind of thing, right? To where you just suddenly have all this unexplained power. You can't just all of a sudden because it's convenient. Because a lot of times, you'll
Hmm.
say, oh, it serves a story. Sometimes it's just lazy storytelling. They don't know how to get out of a certain situation. So it's like, oh, I know. Well, we'll just have the Force do this.
Hmm.
Proper storytelling would be, no, you're setting this up. You're informing the viewer. You're preparing them. You're giving this anticipation, and boom. There's a lot of foreshadowing involved.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, you just want the explanation, which I do as well. I mean, that's the thing.
And
Because quite frankly, to me, I think I could believe I could believe the Force being allowing Ahsoka being able to turn herself into an owl more so than I can believe Leia being sucked out into space and she uses the Force to bring herself back in.
oh, that's interesting.
Because it's like, okay, in the moment that okay, this explosion happens, boom. The only way I can possibly even remotely think that will work for Leia is if she sensed that that was about to happen and she created some sort of force shield around herself to do that.
Well, let's
Because
put it
any
this way.
other way outside of that, it's like,
No, I
okay,
agree. I agree. And
as Doug would say, that's ludicrous.
well, yes, that's exactly what he would say. And the whole Space Mary Poppins thing, when Rise of Skywalker came out, Doug and I did have a thorough discussion, which I cautioned at the time. You have to be careful because you got to remember something about Doug. He's a sci-fi guy, right? And a lot of times, because Star Wars is set in somewhat of a sci-fi context, people tend to leave the fantasy part out. And I'm not saying that just makes an excuse for you to be able to do anything, but here's some things to consider about Leia. First of all, I'm quite certain it's easier to survive that than to turn yourself into an owl. I'm just saying, I'm sure the process is a little simpler than, hey, maybe I'm going to use the Force to, put a little shield around me or something and bring myself in. The biggest complaint that people had about that scene wasn't even so much that, as much as it was that that's the first time we've ever seen Leia use the Force. Now, what happened was The Rise of Skywalker did give us context for all that. Number one, she's the granddaughter of the Force itself. Number two, she had been training with Luke for a long time, right? So because of that, you can go, okay, this might be, and like you said, right? Oh, I'm sensing this is going to happen because the Force partially controls your actions, partially obeys your commands. So it's more conceivable with a little less explanation because we already have some of the context. The problem I have with the owl thing, there's no context. Ahsoka has never been demonstrated even any kind of a knowledge that she's done that. And the only thing that you could say is, okay, and I think that this is actually what you're alluding to, that you see that in Rebels, and now in the Ahsoka series, she's going to flash back. She's going to say, here's how I was able to do this. But,
they're going to ask, like, well, how did you survive Vader? I mean, that's got to be the question.
It's like, all right, let me tell you about this little owl technique that I discovered. I mean, my only problem
so you got the crane technique. The owl technique.
Exactly.
It's a bird
thing.
It's
like, well, I busted, technically it was an illegal move, but, I busted this thing out. But I mean, that's
It wasn't Yoda, it was Miyagi who taught her.
Yeah, right. Well, we wanted to do like a cross. There you go. The crossover between Cobra Kai and Star Wars. Well, I mean, I told you about that whole X-Men Star Trek thing, by the way. Yeah. As you guys may have noticed, we did make a few Star Trek references like we always do in this show. But those are the kinds of things that I hope. Actually, it's something that while you were bringing all this stuff up, that I never really thought about, but I do agree that I really hope that this Ahsoka series does end up maybe filling in some of the things from back during the time of, say, the end of Clone Wars. Because here's the thing, other than the Ahsoka novel, which is technically canon, but they've already altered some things. We pray they don't alter them any further. But you have to look at it from the standpoint of once Ahsoka essentially became a gray Jedi, right? She left the Jedi Order. She still has her Force powers. She's not really adhering to the Jedi Code anymore. So what exactly has she been doing between the time we see her after Season 7 of the Clone Wars and season, what was that, 3 or something that we saw her in Rebels?
Yeah, I think so.
So, you know, she pops up in Rebels. And she's obviously, I mean, she was Fulcrum. You know, how did she become Fulcrum? So she ends up being very deeply rooted into the rebellion, into that whole fight. So how did she go from there? And I think that what's going to happen is we're going to start seeing a little bit of a tie-in with the Obi Wan series in this case, because I think Obi Wan, now that he's basically full Jedi, and of course during Rogue One they said, oh, reach out to your Jedi friend. Number one, we're assuming that they're talking about Obi Wan, but they could have been talking about Ahsoka too. So I'm thinking that
I
maybe
think they were talking about Obi Wan because Ahsoka wasn't a Jedi at the time.
True, but you know they kind of knew her as that. I mean, but you're probably right. I mean, just given the context of that line, it was probably Obi Wan. But the point is that Obi Wan, once he's sort of back and he's contacting Bail, and as long as Bail doesn't spill the entire plan during a open communication like he did in Obi Wan.
Like a little FaceTime.
Yeah. Like that anybody could get a hold of. Yeah, the boy's on Tatooine. It's like, dude, really? I mean, you're a senator.
Here's the coordinates.
Yeah, exactly. Don't
Here's
tell
his Facebook account.
Right. Yep, exactly. Here's his picture. Hey, don't tell anybody this is Anakin's kid, but, you know, we'll just keep that between us or whatever. So as long as he's not doing that, it is conceivable that either Bail or Obi-Wan or somebody did reach out to Ahsoka for help, and she did start to get more and more involved, similar to what happened to Obi-Wan. So maybe in the Ahsoka series we find out a little bit of that, and that would definitely tie in, because what you're talking about is basically, which of course is what this particular show is about tonight, is this Ahsoka Darth Vader duel. We're looking at it as being probably the live action version of the duel that we got in Rebels. If that's the case, this series is probably, in addition to furthering the whole Thrawn thing and everything, it's probably going to actually shine some light on what was going on during that time. Like you said, how she escaped, turned into an owl, and left. But it could also actually give us a little bit of context of how she even got into the rebellion and what happened to her between season 7 of the Clone Wars and Rebels.
Yeah, I mean, she has a lot to answer for, and that's why I'm really anxious to see what this show brings, especially since this is Filoni's baby. So with him being kind of the showrunner on that, like, I really want to, and I just hope they just don't, short changes, like, oh, it's only 8 episodes, like, no, give us
right,
like a full,
and they're all like 20 minutes a piece or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like, no, give us a full hour, or close to an hour for like 10 episodes at least.
Well, that's a good point. Have they even announced how many episodes this thing was?
Not yet, because we don't even have a true release date yet.
That was the other question I was going to have, but it is slated for 2022 still, right? Because I know, we did this
23.
whole video, and what's amazing about it is we talked about all these shows that were slated for 2022, and so far we've been, I'm a little ashamed to say, wrong about a lot, but hey, we went by the information we had. So
right. No, Ahsoka's slated for 23.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess. Okay, so what's the next thing we're getting?
Oh,
wait, what was coming out in September? Is it the Bad Batch?
No,
Andor will
August
be...
and Andor is August.
Okay. But there's something that was coming out. I thought it was going to be Andor, then there was going to be something, which could be the Bad Batch, and then we get Mandalorian season 3.
Yeah, season 3. Yep.
So Ahsoka's probably coming out...
early 2023, from what I heard.
All right, well, let's see. Voyager's got a couple of things to say here. He says, from a website, according to the site, Tom O'Connell is currently being fitted for a new Vader suit that will see him don that for the entirety of the Disney Plus series. Yeah, that was what we were talking about earlier in the show. He goes on to say, I just realized that Ahsoka could have possibly have had multiple interactions with Vader between episodes 4 and 5 or 5 and 6. I never really thought about it that way. So, I mean, I guess we're still pretty much putting our money on, well,
But if they bring it up, I would love to see how they fit that in. But
hey, look,
that just seems a little weird.
It does, but let me just remind you that this is the exact wording that we had with the Vader Obi Wan duel, because we're like, well, number one, we're like, well, there's no way they'll have them duel again. That would be ridiculous. That would ruin everything in 4, and on it goes. And guess what? We were talking about the Vader Obi Wan duel. Actually, technically, we kind of got 2 of them. And it made perfect sense, and it actually enhanced all the stuff. So I'm with you on this, though. I think it's a little bit more the live action version of what we got in Rebels, more as a flashback. But hey, I mean, anything's possible at this point. Then Voyager is setting us straight on the release schedule. He says it's Andor, then the Bad Batch, then Tales of the Jedi, which I keep forgetting about, which I'm looking forward to that one too. That's an animated. That's Filoni's next animated series. Then Mandalorian Season 3, then Ahsoka.
Gotcha.
So, we do have a lot that we can look forward to here that, it's just going to be quite a bit of content coming out. And of course, as always, we'll keep you guys as updated as we can. Remember that if we're wrong, it's only because Kathleen Kennedy lied to us again. Not to us personally, but,
Yes.
to the Star Wars fans. So again, the important thing is not what did we think, it is what do you guys think. So, first of all, you still have like maybe 20, 30 seconds at the most chat in. Of course, if you do, we'll put it up. But if, definitely leave a comment and let us know what you think. First of all, do you think that this Vader-Ahsoka duel is even going to actually be in this thing? And if you do, what do you think it's going to be? Do you think it's going to be pretty much a live-action version of the duel that we got in Rebels, or do you think it's going to be something new? We definitely want to hear from you guys while you're there. And if you're watching right now, don't be shy. Hit that like button. It's not going to hurt. I promise. It's not going to melt the computer. Hit the like button. Hit that subscribe button. Because both of those things help the channel. It allows us to bring this show to more people. Hey, share the link while you're at it. And if you're so inclined, we already have one member that has made a monthly donation to us through the buymecoffee.com. So buy us a blue milk. There's a link, I can talk, in the description to do so. You can make either a one-time donation, it's cool. Support us monthly. There's all kinds of stuff you get if you do that. And Friday, we are talking about... man, this always happens to me. I always blank out. See, we were going to do the Mandalorian Season 3 thing, but that you're going to have to check our texts, because this is
you talk about the Obi Wan
Season 2. Yes, that's right. 10 things, I believe. We basically were reading through some articles. There was one that talked about 10 things that we need to see in Obi Wan Season 2. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through those 10 things and see if we agree with that or not. Maybe we'll add some of our own, I don't know, and discuss it with you guys. Because remember, the whole point of this show is to get together on a Monday and Friday night at 8 o'clock and discuss some Star Wars. Leave all your troubles behind, forget about everything else, and just talk about Star Wars, which, of course, could stress you out. I don't know. So, join us Friday night, 8 o'clock, live. Till then, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.